Imagine a moment of peace shattering unexpectedly, leaving you questioning the world around you. The warm glow of the late afternoon sun bathed the tranquil waters of the pool at Magnolia Creek Residences, a haven in Austin, Texas. Jordan, a 32-year-old software engineer, stretched out on a lounger, his rare moment of respite. Work had been overwhelming, but now, he could finally unwind with a book in hand and the refreshing taste of lemonade to cool him down. The quiet was almost surreal, a small oasis of calm, until the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps drawing closer. He looked up from his book, expecting perhaps a fellow resident, but instead, his gaze locked onto a woman. In her mid-50s, her perfectly styled blonde hair framed her face, her oversized sunglasses perched on her nose like a shield. The air around her buzzed with a sense of superiority, a presence that commanded attention before she even spoke. Jordan recognized her from the complex but had never exchanged a word with her. Yet, as she walked purposefully toward him, her face twisted in a mix of confusion and suspicion, Jordan's moment of peace vanished. She stopped just in front of him, her tone cutting through the air like a blade. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and direct. "Do you live here?" Jordan, caught off guard, hesitated for a brief second before replying, his voice steady. "Yes, I do." He straightened up slightly, unsure of where this was heading. The woman's eyes narrowed, her disbelief evident. "Really?" she questioned, her gaze piercing him as though searching for a lie. "I've never seen you before. Are you sure you're not just visiting someone?" Her words stung, an implication hanging in the air, but Jordan refused to let it show. He simply replied, "I live in apartment 304. I've been here for 2 years." He watched as her lips tightened, as if his answer wasn't enough. Then came her next demand, delivered like a challenge. "If that's true, then show me your key card." The request hit him like a slap. His chest tightened in response, a sense of irritation bubbling beneath the surface, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not obligated to show you anything," he said, his tone calm, yet firm. "If you have a problem, you can contact management." Her face flushed, eyes now blazing with indignation. Without missing a beat, she pulled her phone from her bag and snapped, "I'll call security right now." Jordan sighed, letting the tension roll off him. He leaned back in his chair, trying to ignore the growing sense of drama that was unfolding before him. A few others by the pool were noticing, exchanging glances, some pulling out their phones, the quiet murmur of whispers spreading through the crowd. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Jordan remained unmoved, knowing he had nothing to fear. He wasn't doing anything wrong. As the woman stepped aside to make her call, her voice carried over the pool area, sharp and filled with authority. "Yes, I'm at the pool, and there's someone here who shouldn't be," she said. "He claims to live here, but I've never seen him before. I need someone to come down immediately." Jordan could feel the weight of eyes on him. The bystanders weren't just watching, they were scrutinizing. Some looked uncomfortable, others were simply curious, while a few openly disapproved. A young couple exchanged quiet whispers from across the pool, and an older man in swim trunks shook his head slightly, the scene unfolding like a drama they could not turn away from. Still, no one intervened. The woman, feeling emboldened by the silence, turned back to Jordan, her arms crossed smugly. "You could have avoided all of this if you'd just shown me your key card," she said, her tone victorious. Jordan met her gaze with a calm that seemed to unsettle her further. "I don't owe you anything," he replied, his voice as steady as ever. Her eyes flashed with something darker. "People like you think you can do whatever you want," she muttered, her voice low but audible enough for Jordan and a few nearby residents to hear. His jaw clenched, recognizing the weight of her words. It was clear what she meant, but he refused to let her bait him into an argument. Instead, he turned his focus back to his book, flipping a page as if her words were nothing more than a distant hum. Moments passed, the silence thickening, until the arrival of a young security guard, his expression filled with uncertainty. The woman waved him over with urgency, her voice ringing with triumph. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed. "This man refuses to leave. He claims to live here, but I'm certain he doesn't. He wouldn't even show me his key card." The guard approached hesitantly, his eyes shifting between Jordan and the woman. Jordan stood, setting his book down, towering over them both. "I live here," he said firmly, his voice unyielding. "Apartment 304. You can check with management if you need to." The guard hesitated, glancing back and forth between the two. "Sir, "Do you have your key card with you?" he asked. Jordan reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and opened it. He pulled out his key card and his driver's license, both showing the same address as the complex. "Here you go," Jordan said, holding the card up for inspection. The guard nodded, his face flushing with slight embarrassment. "That checks out," he said, handing the card back. "Sorry for the trouble, sir." The woman's face contorted in disbelief. "Wait, you're just going to take his word for it?" she demanded, her voice rising. The guard stood taller, his voice steady as he responded, "Ma'am, he provided the necessary proof. There's nothing else to discuss." The crowd, which had been silently observing up until this point, finally began to stir. Whispers spread like wildfire, a few murmurs of approval from the onlookers, including a nod of acknowledgement from the young couple. But before the tension could fully dissolve, a voice rang out from the far side of the pool, cutting through the murmurs like a sharp knife. "Enough is enough." All heads turned toward the unexpected voice, and with it came a figure who would change the entire course of this confrontation. An older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, stood, her presence commanding attention. Dressed in a floral sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, she exuded an air of quiet authority. Her name was Eleanor, and her next words would turn the entire situation upside down. A long-time resident of the complex, Eleanor had always been known for her no-nonsense attitude, a reputation that made people take notice when she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she called out firmly, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd as she walked toward the tense scene. Her presence commanded attention, and the subtle shift in the air was palpable. "But this isn't the first time this has happened," she continued, her eyes narrowing with determination. "And I think it's about time someone said something." The woman accusing Jordan spun around, clearly taken aback by the sudden confrontation. Her lips parted, her defensive response ready, but her words faltered. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered, trying to regain control. "Oh, don't play coy," Eleanor shot back, her voice sharp enough to slice through the awkward tension that had settled like a cloud over the pool area. "You've been harassing people in this complex for months, and we're all tired of it." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, as Eleanor's words landed like a truth no one wanted to face. "Just last week, you accused a delivery driver of loitering because he was taking a lunch break in his truck," she pressed, pointing at the woman with a steady finger. "And let's not forget the time you called the cops on the college kids moving into their apartment because they looked suspicious." The woman's face reddened, and her mouth opened to argue, but Eleanor was on a roll, and there would be no interruption. "And now this? Calling security on a man who's done nothing wrong, just because you don't recognize him?" Eleanor's voice dripped with contempt, as she leveled the woman with a look that could freeze fire. "You're embarrassing yourself." A ripple of murmurs spread across the crowd. Some people nodded in quiet agreement, their eyes lingering on the accusing woman, while others shuffled uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. The tension in the air thickened, the once peaceful poolside now charged with the power of confrontation. Jordan, ever the silent observer, let Eleanor take the lead. His chest relaxed slightly as the weight of injustice seemed to shift from his shoulders. He could feel the tide turning, and for the first time that afternoon, he felt a sense of relief. "Do you even realize how ridiculous you look right now?" Eleanor's voice softened, but the clarity in her words struck like a hammer to glass. "We're supposed to be a community here," she continued, her eyes locking with the woman's, "treating people like they don't belong just because they don't fit your narrow idea of who does. That's not how we do things here." The words hung in the air for a moment, thick with truth. Then, like a storm breaking, the first clap rang out. It was slow, unsure, but it grew, quickly turning into a chorus of applause. The accusing woman flinched as the sound washed over her, drowning out her protests. Her face twisted, and the confidence she had once wielded so sharply crumbled into something far less certain. The applause was deafening, but the woman's pride had shattered in the face of communal solidarity. "This is absurd," she muttered, but the words held no conviction. Her shoulders slumped, and with a swift motion, she gathered her things, stumbling away in a flurry of embarrassment, the sound of her retreating footsteps marked by the finality of her defeat. Eleanor turned back to Jordan, her expression softening as she met his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said, her voice warm with a kindness that seemed to diffuse the tension still lingering in the air. "It's not right, and it's not fair." Jordan offered a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you. I really do appreciate that." As Eleanor returned to her seat, the crowd slowly began to disperse, the energy in the pool area still crackling with the aftermath of the scene. But though the physical space was clearing, the incident wasn't over, not by a long shot. The whispers in the crowd had found their way to new channels, and soon, the video of the confrontation would make its way into the world beyond Magnolia Creek. Before long, the footage was circulating on social media like wildfire. A younger resident, Lucas, had uploaded the video, captioning it simply, "This just happened at Magnolia Creek. When will this stop?" The clip captured the entire exchange, everything from the accusing woman's demands to Jordan's calm demeanor, and of course, Eleanor's impassioned defense, culminating in the applause that silenced the would-be accuser. It didn't take long for the video to catch fire. Back at his apartment, Jordan sat on the couch, still absorbing the day's events. His phone buzzed constantly as messages flooded in from friends and coworkers, tagging him in the video, expressing their disbelief, and offering their support. Jordan hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. What started as a quiet altercation by the pool had now spiraled into something much bigger than he could have anticipated. Meanwhile, in the leasing office, Miss Delgado, the property manager, scrolled through the video on her phone, her brow furrowed with growing concern. It wasn't the first time complaints had been made against the woman in question, Deborah. But this time, there was undeniable proof, and that made all the difference. Miss Delgado knew it was time to act. The next morning, Jordan found himself seated across from Deborah in the leasing office conference room. The air between them was thick with tension. Deborah, clearly less confident than she had been the day before, avoided eye contact with Jordan, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her purse. Miss Delgado wasted no time. "I've reviewed the footage," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "Deborah, this behavior is unacceptable. You've been targeting residents and visitors based on assumptions that have no merit. This is harassment, plain and simple." Deborah stammered, trying to defend herself. "I was just trying to keep the community safe. How was I supposed to know he lived here?" she said, her voice shaking. But Miss Delgado's gaze remained firm, unwavering. "It's not your job to police who belongs here. That's why we have security and a management team. Your actions have caused unnecessary distress to Mr. Harris and others. As of today, you are receiving an official warning. Any further complaints of this nature will result in the termination of your lease." Deborah's face flushed crimson with humiliation, and she sputtered a half-hearted protest. But the words died on her lips as she realized there was no escaping the consequences. With a final, defeated mutter, she stormed out of the room, leaving Miss Delgado and Jordan alone. Miss Delgado turned to Jordan, her expression softening with a genuine apology. "I'm truly sorry this happened. If there's anything else we can do to support you, please let me know." Jordan nodded, a mix of emotions flooding through him. "I appreciate that. Thank you." As he left the office, a sense of relief washed over him. The ordeal was over, but a lingering sadness remained. Why did it take this long for someone to stand up against such behavior? By the time evening came, the video had gone viral. News outlets picked it up, and hashtags like #JordanHarris and #CalloutKaren began trending across social media platforms. What had started as a quiet moment of injustice had turned into something much larger, the impact of the day reaching far beyond the confines of Magnolia Creek. The internet ignited with a wave of discussions on accountability, prejudice, and the urgent need to confront injustice. Messages poured in from all over, as strangers reached out to Jordan, sharing their own stories and expressing gratitude for his calm, dignified response. What had begun as a personal ordeal had now taken on global significance, sparking debates that reached far beyond the confines of Magnolia Creek. By morning, the video had gone viral, with millions of views flooding social media platforms, news programs, and even major talk shows. The nation was now talking about the deeper implications of racial profiling and accountability. Jordan, whose name had quickly become synonymous with a pivotal moment in the conversation, couldn't escape the magnitude of it all. It wasn't something he'd sought out, but it was now an unavoidable reality. He woke up to an inbox brimming with messages, some from complete strangers. They were thanking him, praising his poise, and telling him how his actions had given them the courage to confront injustice in their own lives. Activists reached out, offering to help amplify his voice. Brands, organizations, and even influencers sent emails, asking if he'd be interested in collaborating or speaking about his experience. Yet, as much as there was support, there was also criticism. Detractors called him an overreactor, accusing him of turning a simple misunderstanding into something much more dramatic than it needed to be. But Jordan wasn't bothered. He understood that this wasn't just about him. It was about something far larger, an issue that demanded attention, and his experience had resonated in a way that couldn't be ignored. Back at Magnolia Creek, the ripple effects of the incident began to grow. The fallout for Deborah was swift and brutal. Anonymous accounts of her past behavior were shared, amplifying the public's fury. Her name began trending alongside his, though the reactions were vastly different. While some offered her sympathy, most condemned her actions. There were even calls for her to undergo anti-bias training or face potential legal repercussions for harassment. The community, once fractured by silent tension, began to engage in open dialogue. Residents, who had previously stayed quiet, now shared their own experiences. The atmosphere at the complex began to shift. Miss Delgado, the property manager, took the concerns seriously. She organized workshops and panels focused on unconscious bias and building stronger community ties. As the days passed, Jordan's life took an unexpected turn. He received an invitation to speak on a major talk show, where he shared his story. During the interview, he spoke with raw sincerity about the importance of remaining calm in the face of injustice and about the need for unity in the face of adversity. It's not just about calling out bad behavior, he said. It's about creating spaces where everyone feels they belong. No one should have to prove they have the right to exist. The interview, too, went viral, cementing his place as a symbol of resilience and grace under pressure. But even with the media frenzy, the real reward for Jordan came closer to home. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged his presence now greeted him with warmth, offering kind words and genuine smiles. Eleanor, the neighbor who had stood by him during the ordeal, became a frequent visitor, often bringing homemade baked goods and regaling him with stories from her eventful life. The incident, which had sparked so much turmoil, had also ignited a change. Not just in Jordan, but in the entire community. What was once a place of discomfort and hidden animosities had transformed. Magnolia Creek, slowly but surely, was becoming a more inclusive and compassionate place. Jordan could see it in the way people interacted with each other. No longer were they strangers, suspicious of one another, but neighbors sharing space, each with their own stories and struggles. It was a subtle shift, but a meaningful one. Children played freely in the courtyard, their parents no longer hovering anxiously on the sidelines. It was as if the walls of suspicion had crumbled, brick by brick. As for Deborah, her reputation had been irrevocably damaged. Though she hadn't been evicted, she kept to herself, avoiding common areas and walking quickly whenever she passed others. Whispers about her possible move spread through the complex, but nothing was certain. What was undeniable, though, was that the incident had forced her to confront her behavior. Whether she would change, only time would tell. Jordan, meanwhile, took the lessons he had learned and turned them into action. With encouragement from Eleanor and others who supported him, he organized a community event, a barbecue open to all residents. The goal was simple, to foster connection and understanding among neighbors who might never have interacted otherwise. The turnout was overwhelming. Families brought homemade dishes, children played games, and conversations flowed freely. Eleanor, sitting in a corner, chatted with a group of younger residents, her laughter rising above the music and chatter. Jordan worked the grill, flipping burgers and handing out plates, a sense of pride swelling within him. It was a fulfillment he hadn't expected. As the evening wore on, and the sun dipped below the horizon, Jordan stood on the patio, watching the gathering. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to overcome, barriers to break down, and conversations to be had. But it was a start. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the community was a place where people truly belonged. When the crowd began to thin, Eleanor approached him with a plate of cookies. "You've done something really special here," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "I hope you know that." Jordan smiled, accepting the plate. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. "You were the first one to speak up." She waved him off with a laugh. "Well, somebody had to. But you turned it into something bigger. Something meaningful." As the evening wound down, Jordan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had begun as a painful, frustrating incident had blossomed into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and change, not just for him, but for the entire community. The viral video may have eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by the next trending story, but the lessons it carried would remain. Jordan's actions, Eleanor's courage, and the community's response had sparked a ripple effect that reached far beyond the gates of Magnolia Creek. The story of Magnolia Creek is a reminder that standing up against prejudice isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes, it's about building bridges, fostering dialogue, and creating spaces where everyone feels safe, valued, and seen. Small actions, like speaking up, can lead to monumental change. But it all starts with the courage to say, "This isn't right."